Actually, a favorite of mine.
Yeah, it's a favorite of mine too, for sure. Today we're going to talk about how to make the night in the tent comfortable. What's your thoughts about that?
Oh, well, first of all, I think it's important to look at the surrounding and the nature and, well, basically find a decently flat spot to make it comfortable when you lie down. And also here we are quite close to the water, and that's always very nice to pitch the tent very close to the water. It's beautiful, but you also have to think about the moist. So for us tonight, we are actually pitching the tent a little bit far off the water to get a little bit more dry air up here.
And then we have no super exposure to wind, as we are protected by the trees pretty well. But if we were like on an exposed area, like on the mountain or closer to the water or wherever the wind really gets a hold of the tent, then the alignment to the wind would be super relevant, of course, also. So, but this spot will do the trick for the purpose.
Let's get moving.
Yeah. Det står ett träd. So, when creating the conditions for a nice tent night, you would want to make sure that the tent fabric is fully stretched, both to avoid the flapping sound of wind in the tent, but also to avoid moisture that will occur during the night to disturb you. The fabric on most Fjallraven tent is made out of polyamide, nylon. The properties of this material is that it expands when it gets wet, and if you stretch up the tent as much as possible before going to bed, the conditions are perfectly set for a good night inside the tent. All right, before going to bed, what's your thinking?
The first thing you do when you're entering the tent is actually to open up all the ventilation. Well, you have the ventilation here in the back, and you open it fully. In the door, you
Yes.
can actually, you use simply the mosquito net and keep it open. If you are 150% sure that it's not going to rain, and maybe if you don't have any gear close to the door, I mean, obviously you can keep the mosquito net only, but you never know what's going to happen in the night. So if you want to keep your gear dry, maybe I would use the
So
flashy
why is this ventilation so important then, you think?
Because otherwise you're going to get so much moist. Maybe we should open this. You get so much moist on the inside, and actually it's a lot of people they tend to think that the colder it is, the more you have to close, but it's actually the opposite around. So especially if you're camping in winter time, if you don't open the ventilation, you're going to get almost like a cover of ice on the inside, and you don't want that at all. You want to keep everything inside here dry. And in order to do that, you have to open the ventilation and get all the moist air out.
I think that's probably one of the most common mistakes, and where any tent producer would get the most claims on the tents. People say that the tent is not waterproof, it's leaking, but the fact of the matter is that most of the time it's due to poor ventilation.
Yes, but the worst part is if you do get the water on the inside of the tent, your sleeping bag is going to be moist as well, and that is the worst thing.
Yeah, so my rule of thumb is like open up as much as possible
Yeah.
And if it's super cold and windy and you're not retaining any heat at all, then you start to close. But if you're fine, you're fine.
Yeah,
It's all about moisture management.
it is.
That's also why the outer fly sheet of the tent, it's waterproof, polyamide with silicone treatment on both sides, PFC free. And the inner tent is a polyester that is hydrophobic.
Yes.
So the water escapes through it
Yes.
quite well.
Yeah. So now we have entered the tent and we know how to ventilate. What are you wearing when you're sleeping in a tent?
A liner base layer, like a wool base layer, long johns, and the top is what I would put on to start with. And if it's cold, I would definitely wear a beanie and socks.
Yeah.
I would probably not wear more in the sleeping bag.
No.
Then before going to sleep, what do you do in the tent?
Well, you have to have the heat in your body before you enter the tent.
Yeah.
In this season, in the summertime, it's no problem, but especially if it's colder, you would need to maybe work out a little bit so you have a good body temperature before you enter the tent, I think.
I mean, the sleeping bag is exactly like a thermos. If
Yeah.
you put something cold in it, it will remain cold for a long, long time. And if you put something warm in it, it will insulate and will stay warm for a long time.
That's a really good example because that's just how it is.
That's you need to be warm before you put yourself into the sleeping bag.
Yes. I think one important part is also the sleeping mat. What's your thought about
Yeah, I mean, no matter how thick of a sleeping bag you have, if you don't have a proper insulation from the cold or from the ground, the sleeping bag won't keep you warm. You need to insulate from the cold coming from the ground. And again, one of the best, or maybe the best, insulator is the air. So getting a barrier with air between you and the ground is like the theory behind it. First, we have a ground sheet, like a 14 millimeter foam mat, kind of sleeping mat. And on that, we add like an inflatable sleeping mat with a lot of air.
We said before that you have to look for a decently flat space on the ground, but to be honest, it's not that simple all the time. So use the spare clothes that you have to even out and to get that flat ground, because you'll have a much more comfortable sleep, I think.
But it's not that important to find the perfect spot to pitch the tent. As long as you can get the pegs down and the tent is secured, you can build up from the inside to make a comfortable bed.
Because if you do want to find that perfect spot, you would have to go and look in a garden
somewhere.
Exactly.
And
that's not
or a campsite.
That's not what we do. No.
All right. What you're thinking about the sleeping bags, and I mean, there are different ratings and stuff like that.
Well, all sleeping bags, there are like a temperature span. Most of the time it's like a comfort temperature and also an extreme temperature. And then you have to sort of get back to yourself and think, am I a cold person? Am I warm? If you're using a sleeping bag that is made for really cold temperatures and it's a little bit too warm, you're going to sweat a lot. And then you're going to get the sleeping bag moist. But if it is too cold at night, we do have some tips as well on how to adjust
for
that.
Sure.
Yeah,
I could use like a sleeping bag liner. You can increase the temperature that the sleeping bag has capacity to insulate a lot by adding one layer extra inside the whole sleeping bag. So a sleeping bag liner would increase the insulating capacity a bit. Yeah.
and I see you also brought something that is actually a favorite of mine, the bottle.
The bottle.
Yes, I always use it.
What do you use it for?
I use it as a little, like a little heater inside the sleeping bag. So I boil water, the last thing I do in the evening, and I fill my bottle up, and you put a little sock on it. I think it's good because otherwise it gets too hot. And I put this one in the sleeping bag maybe 10 minutes before I go to bed, and then when I get in the bag, it's all nice and comfy.
And I have also a little bit of a reinforcement jacket. And that one I would, if I'm cold, I would put it on top of my sleeping bag, something like that, when I'm in it, to just reinforce on the outside to trap the air, keep it warm, and put a little bit of extra insulation to the sleeping bag. And then I also brought my shell jacket.
Mm-hmm. And how do you use that one?
It's a little bit of reinforcement, but it's also moisture management. So I'd put it on top of my sleeping bag on the foot section to protect actually the sleeping bag from getting in contact with our inner tent. It's all about moisture management, and you will have moisture inside of the tent, and if you can protect the sleeping bag, it will both bring a little bit of reinforcement but also protection from the moisture.
True. I see that you have something here as well that could add to the comfort. Sure. What's that?
This is a little pillow.
That's quite luxury.
Yeah.
I usually take a bag that will be a perfect pillow as well. I usually create my own pillow along the way.
Yeah, me too. All right, so you've done all the tricks in the book, and you're still freezing.
Oh, that's really bad, because then you will have a bad night sleep, and you'll be tired in the morning, and that is something that we really want to prevent.
Yeah.
And I think there are no actual shortcuts to gain the heat back. You have to get out, and you have to get outside of the tent and start moving around in order to get that body heat back again.
Funny enough, usually goes hand in hand with getting the feeling that you need to go out and take a pee.
True, that's true. And also it's really bad if you are lying in the tent and you have that need, but you're also so cold at the same time. Even though it's mentally hard to get up and get out, I think that is the number one thing to do.
Just do it.
Just do it. So there are some tips for making the night as comfortable and warm or cold as possible.
Yeah. Ventilation, get rid of the moisture, insulate from the ground, and add some inside or outside of the sleeping bag, and if you need to go. No more things to add. Good night.
Good night.